especially when there's going to be something like the Galarian Weezing that's going to be really important to keep in mind so you can actually have access to your abilities. But we will get started with the first game of this best of 3 where both of these Shadow Rider Calyrex are on their field for the respective players, but it's going to be the Incineroar next to Marco and the Raging Bolt for James.
I would say slight advantage to Marco here. The Incineroar is a very powerful lead, especially facing down a Calyrex Shadow Rider. It's one of the very few Pokemon that doesn't necessarily have to worry about taking too much damage from it. Of course, you have to also consider the Helping Hand option on that Incineroar. Already a very supportive Pokemon with Fake Out, with Intimidate, with Parting Shot, with Knock Off, but adding in Helping Hand means that you have the possibility for some extra damage.
And when you look at the Terra type differences between both of these Shadow Rider Calyrex, James doesn't have a defensive option. It's Terra Ghost to make sure that those Astral Barrages will hit even harder. But Marco's is the Terra Dark, so he already has 2 resistances on the field to James's own Shadow Rider Calyrex. And so, yeah, I agree with you. I think this lead is great for Marco.
The defensive option is the Focus Sash in this case. You can't tear away and take a little bit less damage, but you can at least guarantee you survive 1 Astral Barrage if you really need to. The speeds of these Calyrex are going to be very important as well. That comes into a lot of matchups.
Ooh, but the Thunderclap comes out from the Raging Bolt first, so you know that this Incineroar is going for attack. If there's a double up from Marco to actually go into the Shadow Rider Calyrex, then, you know, it would have been getting knocked out, but this Shadow Rider Calyrex on Marco's end gets knocked out in the process. No Focus Sash on this one since it's that Life Orb. And that's kind of a surprise here that Marco would be so willing to give it up versus this Shadow Rider Calyrex.
All right, we are finding out that we're actually going to have to pause the game really quick. We had a little bit of a technical issue which prevented one of the players from seeing some of the action going on the screen. So we're going to return to that matchup in just a little bit while that gets sorted out. Maybe it explains the kind of the
questionable actions in that
exactly.
first turn. That makes a lot of sense. So, yeah, we are working with the Switch 2 systems, which has been so awesome. But sometimes when we have like a Switch 2 with a Switch 1, you know, we're just still working out all of the really cool opportunities that the Switch 2 provides. So thank you all so much for bearing with us, and we will get back into action super shortly. So while we do that, I think we can already talk a little bit more about those minute differences. I think the Terras on the Calyrex Shadows were so important, and then the ability for maybe the Incineroar to have gone for that double up there. I think you could see maybe Marco, if you Terra there, you actually don't get knocked out. You double into the Incineroar, into the Shadow Rider Calyrex from James. And so, like, Astral Barrage, knock off. That's going to get you down to the Focus Sash and take you out of the game. So as we get back into it, we are going to see both trainers stick to the same leads when we get the retry here.
This is a full reset. There's no obligation to make any similar choices from that first game. It's as if we are starting from 0 right now, but both trainers did opt into that same exact lead. It's going to be the Calyrex Shadow Rider Incineroar from Marco and the Calyrex Shadow Rider and Raging Bolt from James. And even though that first bit that we saw doesn't count in terms of the score, we at least know that James's Calyrex Shadow Rider attacked before Marco's. Whether or not that means it's naturally going to be faster, it still possibly could be a speed tie. That's just info that both of these trainers do have at their own disposal now. And so it's going to be, a kind of choice to see how they play it out. We do see a Terra right off the bat. Maybe Marco realizes, hey, I've seen my Calyrex act second. Got to make sure it doesn't get knocked out immediately first.
Yeah, the Terra makes so much more sense here. And I think even still, we can see what James is going to opt to do on this turn. Instead of actually seeing the Thunderclap, we do have that micro adjustment of the Incineroar faking out the Raging Bolt, so it wasn't going for a priority attack either at this time around, as the Astral Barrage now from Marco Silva gets a chance to let loose into both targets. You can see how well the Assault Vest from the Raging Bolt is going to help it in this situation, but maybe it's actually a roll to get the double KO onto this Pokemon despite that item.
It might be very close. A combination of Astral Barrage and a knockoff from Incineroar should do the trick. Also, you have to consider the option of Helping Hand on Incineroar. One Helping Hand Astral Barrage should be enough for 2 KOs here. But if the Raging Bolt is able to get a Thunderclap off and James's Calyrex acts first again, which we've now seen twice, but still not outside the realm of possibility that it is a speed tie, it's going to have to come down to whether or not this Calyrex on Marco's side of the field will be able to get this Astral Barrage off.
It feels like it should be able to. I don't know if maybe we also see whether or not Marco wants to kind of try to take both of these KOs. It's certainly possible with where the speeds are and just still how much damage both the Calyrex and the Incineroar took from that Astral Barrage. And you've got the Helping Hand as well. So even if it was going to be a roll onto the Raging Bolt in terms of that Astral Barrage damage, it's definitely not going to matter anymore because that Helping Hand is going to boost up the offensive power of this Astral Barrage. So look at it. The difference in both of these Shadow Rider Calyrex's abilities to take these attacks. It's a double KO here for Marco, and that's going to be a +2 special attack boost to this Calyrex since it was the one to deliver that final blow.
The Dark Terra coming in huge here for Marco. That difference in defensive option, compared to the Focus Sash, you're easily able to stomach 2 Astral Barrages on your own Calyrex Shadow Rider as opposed to James, who does have to rely on that Focus Sash, and once it's gone, it's just going to get knocked out immediately. We've now seen 3 turns of James's acting first. We're getting to the point where, okay, maybe we can start to think that James's is a little bit faster, but again, it's still not guaranteed. Technically could be a speed tie too if it really comes down to that. We do get the Sun set up from the Koraidon though. The Orichalcum Pulse is activated, the attack is boosted, and the Choice Scarf Chi-Yu is now the only thing that is preventing this Astral Barrage Calyrex Shadow Rider from running through this game.
Well, the Incineroar is going to be such a nice piece to have later. You can reset the option for Fake Out, and especially because you do, but you still have Terrestrialization available, so I think I look at the Chi-Yu, and maybe that would be a good thing for James to use if the Incineroar comes back out later and you want to make sure that you're getting rid of that option to get faked out. But we can see just this is just kind of a reset turn here. Marco is unfortunately going to bring in this Zamazenta to have to take the collision course. But, with that defense boost, is able to take that okay to go into the next turn. The problem, though, is this Zamazenta is not nearly as fast as this Koraidon is. And the Chi-Yu faster as well. But you've got access to Wide Guard now.
You do. I think the Dark Pulse was the lock for this Choice Scarf Chi-Yu, though, and you have to rely on this Dark Pulse being enough damage to KO this Calyrex Shadow Rider. It does have a pretty decent special defense stat, and the Dark Terra might help you out. The Beads of Ruin might be the difference maker.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the Dark Pulse into the Calyrex is going to be enough to get that knockout, and so James is starting to even up the Pokemon count a little bit. Still down 1, Marco has a fully healthy, unrevealed Pokemon in the back, but you could also just bring out the Incineroar here and drop the attack stat of this Koraidon. You've got Intimidate, and since it's not going to be the clear amulet that we usually see, you call that the ability shield for the Galarian Weezing, it's easy to be able to drop the attack stat and then make sure that this Koraidon can't do nearly as much damage. You can really stall out the Sun here now, too, if you're Marco.
Incineroar coming through would also almost force the Terrestrialization out of the Chi-Yu if you don't want it to get, faked out and slow you down a little bit. I guess even if the Chi-Yu gets faked out, you still have your Koraidon that can finish off the Zamazenta in time, so maybe that's not quite the correct move there, but it's going to be tough, right? This Chi-Yu is now the fastest thing on the field, will be for the remainder of the game. It's locked into Dark Pulse, which will be pretty effective at hitting this Raging Bolt. Not very effective into the Incineroar and Zamazenta, but luckily you have this Koraidon with very powerful fighting type attacks that can handle them at the same time. Again, you do have this Terrestrialization available to you, so if you want to possibly take the chance to maybe double up onto this Raging Bolt, maybe try and KO it with a combination of attacks from Koraidon and Chi-Yu, then your Chi-Yu can't get knocked out by Zamazenta, and you leave it around to maybe handle a little bit of chip damage for the rest of the game. The Raging Bolt from Marco is that booster energy set. We don't see the item activate because the Sun is active, but we still do get that Photosynthesis boost in special attack, which might also be very handy in maybe taking advantage of those Beads of Ruin too.
Yep, so there's the Terrestrialization. Makes a lot of sense too, just for body presses against this Zamazenta. And this Chi-Yu really wants to stick around since it's going to be one of the final pieces of offense that James has here alongside of that Koraidon. But if the Koraidon is not Terrestrializing, then it's going to be a little bit more vulnerable to things like that Dragon Pulse from the Raging Bolt. But you know what? Marco says maybe you're going to be attacking into this slot, and that's correct. Raging Bolt does go for the Protect here, and that means maybe Zamazenta gets a chance to get away with something since the Koraidon is going to double attack into this protect onto the Raging Bolt. So Zamazenta is free and clear to go for a move. It's going to be the heavy slam down to the Chi-Yu. What a great call there. Chi-Yu, not the bulkiest of Pokemon, so Zamazenta really gets a chance to take advantage of that weight difference and that Terra.
Incredible call there from Marco. That heavy slam means that now this Thunderclap will be able to knock out Chi-Yu and give Marco a big 3-1 Pokemon lead. Really huge call there because the heavy slam into a non-terrestrialized Chi-Yu would not have been enough, but reading directly through that terrestrialization, just like we've seen in earlier games today, really big piece for Marco.
Collision Course into the Raging Bolt is still going to be pretty good, but we're getting to the point now where this body press from the Koraidon is going to make it even easier. You can only use Collision Course to knock out one of these Pokemon, and Marco should have enough gas in the tank to be able to deal one final attack to this Koraidon to knock it out. So Koraidon, with this final Collision Course, is going to choose to go into the Zamazenta to take it out and hope that this Raging Bolt doesn't actually have enough attack behind it to get the knockout onto this Koraidon. But with the Dragon Pulse, it's going to be good for the KO, and Marco Silva wins game number 1 of this best of 3 for Swiss round number 11.
Marco's now 1 game away from clinching a spot in the top cut portion of NAIC this season, sending James to the brink here. Of course, still has another chance next round if he does lose this next game, but you really, really want to take your chance right now, to make sure you're in that top cut, maybe try and win a next game afterwards, to maybe get that round 1 bye in top cut as well. Really appealing there. But we really saw the difference being this Calyrex Shadow Rider Terra type. Early on, the Calyrex Shadow Rider from Marco was able to survive a couple Astral Barrages, which unfortunately James's was just not able to. And even though the Calyrex was knocked out before it could attack with those +2 special attack boosts, it just really did too much damage, and it was really hard for James to come back there.
I think it's rough as well because I think James does have some speed options, but the speed doesn't matter if you don't have that defensive Terra, as you said. Electro of the Raging Bolt would be good to just give at least a little bit more speed to something like that Koraidon, but do you want to bring out the Koraidon instead in front of the Shadow Rider Calyrex? I think you still have that same issue where you don't really have a very good defensive type versus the opposing Shadow Rider.
You do have something like the Brute Bonnet, one of the best Pokemon into Shadow Rider in this format because it has access to Sucker Punch. You can even put it to sleep with Spore if you want.
Yeah,
and that
that's
dark
true.
typing is really valuable. But just looking at Marco's team, the Brute Bonnet is also pretty difficult to use against Zamazenta, against Incineroar, against the Hearthflame Mask Ogerpon, which can even get a critical hit to get through that Photosynthesis defense boost that most of the Brute Bonnets are running these days. Even U-Turn from Rillaboom does a good chunk. It's a really difficult Pokemon to bring into this matchup despite being so good into Calyrex Shadow Rider.
Also, just to clarify, both of these players are playing on a Switch 2, so before that game 1, we just kind of had a minor monitor issue that caused us to have to restart the game, but we are all good now, and it looks like we are ready to go for that game 2. Let's roll right into it. Marco is going to lead this time with the Ogerpon, Heartflame, and the Incineroar, so not his own Shadow Rider Calyrex this time, and maybe that gives James enough room to get enough mileage out of his own Shadow Rider next to this Raging Bolt this time around.
This is a much better place for this Raging Bolt to be in. Being a Dragon type, it's going to shrug off any attacks from this Ogerpon Hearthflame. And of course, the Incineroar being such a bulky set, probably not going to be able to do too much damage to it right off the bat either. So now your Calyrex Shadow Rider is free to start firing off some all-important Astral Barrages before it can start being threatened by an Astral Barrage of Marco's own. This Hearthflame Ogerpon, though, I really do like as a mix-up here, especially if you're thinking James is going to be bringing the Koraidon, which you usually expect someone to be bringing both of those restricted Pokemon. It can take really good advantage of the Sun, especially if it opts for a Fire Terrestrialization of its own, between Embody Aspect for the +1 boost, the power boost from Terra, the Sun boost. Those IV Cudgels are going to be really terrifying.
Yeah, but can you actually survive? I think that's the hard thing about this Ogerpon is, do you actually have enough HP or enough defenses to be able to deal with this Calyrex, especially because now we're going to see this Chi-Yu hit the field, so the Beads of Ruin is going to drop the special defense capabilities of this Ogerpon as well. Astral Barrage now coming out from James. You can see it. He's ready to send it into the Ogerpon and the Incineroar, and despite that Beads of Ruin, it is going to make sure that this Ogerpon is alive, and so is this Shadow Rider Calyrex.
IV Cudgel comes through into the right spot, though. You really wanted that Calyrex's Focus Sash to be broken, because now it's in a spot where it's very heavily threatened by something like the Grassy Glide from Ogerpon. If Marco does have that Rillaboom in the back, you do have access to the priority attack. But if Marco does have Rillaboom, that means he doesn't bring one of his restricted Pokemon. So I don't know if that's a trade you really want to be making for Marco here, giving up one of those two very powerful Pokemon that got you through that first game.
But it is nice to know that the Ogerpon is still here, even just like not as an offensive threat, but you also have the option for follow me. So if you wanted to, okay, you can't really follow me away the Astral Barrage, but you know, what if Chiyu does go for some sort of single target attack? And you still have the spiky shield, so it's much safer to be able to go for a pivot here.
Ooh.
And you're right, it is the Rillaboom that's in the back.
Okay, so one of the restricted Pokemon isn't here for Marco, but if we do see the Grassy Glide, it's going to be a KO onto this Calyrex, which could be really a big swing for Marco at the beginning of this game.
So now it's really about this Ogerpon getting enough mileage into something like this Chiyu, and you've got this Terastallization on top to ensure that you're going to be doing as much damage as possible. But wow, with the Grassy Glide, it's plenty, and then you now have the defensive part of this fire type Terastallization for this Chiyu, but it's the Dark Pulse now that's going to get let loose into the Rillaboom, which was something that Marco could anticipate because of the Chiyu before. And the Choice Scarf, now you're locked into that Dark Pulse.
Yeah, it is a nice thing to be locked into Dark Pulse here for James, because now you still have a way to damage this Terastallized Ogerpon. That is a big swing in momentum in Marco's favor here, because you were able to knock out that Astral Barrage Calyrex Shadow Rider, which was threatening a lot of damage over the course of this game. And now that you're kind of up 4 Pokemon to 3, you can start to kind of whittle away at some of James's more offensive resources. The Calyrex, in this case, you know, 1/2 of the restricted pair. The Koraidon you still have to deal with. And seeing, you know, Hearthflame Ogerpon pretty low, Incineroar doesn't want to be facing down that collision course, especially if it can't Terastallize itself. And now Rillaboom. Those are 3 Pokemon that Koraidon actually is very strong against. So despite having the Pokemon advantage, it might be still a little bit difficult for Marco to navigate this game.
Yeah, but Rillaboom still has the option to fake something out here. Since it just switched in, it could fake out that Koraidon, or it forces this Chiyu into a position where you have to go for the Ghost Terra Ghost Terra on it to make sure it can actually get through the fake out. But maybe James is anticipating that. That's something that I love to see out of our trainers is, did you condition in that first game? And now is that something that your opponent is going to play around?
At the same time, too, though, Chiyu is in a very good defensive spot. There's only the option for resisted attacks other than U-turn out of this Rillaboom. So you could Terastallize into the Ghost to dodge a Fake Out, but then you've left yourself in a position where you're going to take a lot more damage on following turns. Even like open yourself up to a Grassy Glide KO, possibly from that Ogerpon. So the Chiyu, maybe not Terastallizing on this given turn. I believe it's going to be that Koraidon instead.
Yeah, it is. So a switch up here from James in this game, too, as he is going to put a little bit more emphasis on this Koraidon this time around with that Terra Fire. You've got access now to even more boosted power for the Flare Blitz, the Flame Charge, since the sun is active. But as this Rillaboom just turned onto the field, you can go for the Fake Out and at least stop this Koraidon for 1 turn. And it's going to be Incineroar that actually does take that Dark Pulse. So much better Pokemon to be able to put in its place. And you saw how much that Intimidate can matter now for the Koraidon as well, dropping its attack.
Incineroar coming in means Fake Out remains active for Marco, which is going to be a really nice way to kind of reposition some of your Pokemon. I do think the Fire Terra on the Koraidon was a really great option here because it also prevents this Koraidon from immediately getting knocked out by a Psychic from Marco's Calyrex Shadow Rider, if that is the 4th Pokemon too.
Now Chiyu has to go for the Rillaboom here, and Dark Pulse does have a chance to flinch, but it's not going to. The U-turn is enough to get into the Chiyu, and that's one of the nice things about having a Rillaboom. That's going to be one of the slower things on the field. You can get through the offense of your opponents, have the ability to U-turn out, and whatever comes into its place doesn't take any damage this turn.
It's a hard choice as to what to bring in here, though. If Calyrex Shadow Rider is the 4th Pokemon from Marco, which I think probably is, based on how that first game went.
Ooh,
is there no restricted at all?
He didn't bring a restricted at all.
Are you kidding me?
The Raging Bull is the 4th and final Pokemon here for Marco in this game number 2, and I can't believe he benched both of these restricted Pokemon for this.
I can't believe it, but also that's kind of what you wanted here. Like the Zamazenta and the Calyrex Shadow Rider were both like not safe in this position. You had to deal with the fire, like the Flare Blitz or the Collision Course if you're Zamazenta. You had to deal with the Choice Scarf Dark Pulse if you're the Calyrex Shadow Rider. But Raging Bolt here, actually one of the things that can deal with both of these Pokemon pretty well. You've got access to that Priority Thunderclap, which with the Beads of Ruin will do a lot of damage to that Koraidon, especially with the Photosynthesis special attack boost. You're pretty bulky, so you can probably take can attack from both of these Pokemon and be able to fire off some really important damage in return.
And you've got the helping hand from the Incineroar as well. Let's not forget about that. And an additional modifier to go for this Raging Bolt's damage. It has to take a Dark Pulse first, as well as a Collision Course that actually goes into the Incineroar here. So a knockout there. Incineroar did at least get a chance to do something with this helping hand. But can this Raging Bolt attack on this turn? It really wants to try to secure a knockout or some big damage here. And it does flinch. The Dark Pulse, it only has a sliver of a chance to do that. And now Marco, who was in a position to really get a big swing in this turn, got it denied.
That would have been a huge turn for Marco. I think the Thunderbolt coming out from this Raging Bolt would have been able to KO either of these Pokemon with that helping hand and Photosynthesis boost. But Dark Pulse, while doing a good amount of damage, also does have that flinch chance. Comes in very handy for James here. I do like targeting down that Incineroar with the Collision Course. You're tempted to go for that double target there into the Raging Bolt, just to get it a little bit closer to being knocked out. But removing the Incineroar removes the Intimidate. If you want to swap your Koraidon out, you have the ability to bring it back in later with a not nerfed attack stat from that Intimidate. And of course, it is just a really valuable piece on Marco's team for the ability to kind of pivot and fake out.
And you also saw that there's only one more turn of grassy terrain remaining. So if you wanted to use those priority options on both the Rillaboom and the Ogerpon with Grassy Glide, you have to find a way to pivot this Rillaboom out, and that probably means sacrificing your own Ogerpon and just kind of leaving this Rillaboom. So at least it gets a chance to fake out now. You can think about maybe U-turn on the next turn, but this Koraidon is free and clear to go for this Flare Blitz in the sun. That is definitely enough damage to get this Rillaboom KO. And so Marco has no grassy terrain at the end of this turn, only that Ogerpon and two Pokemon in front of him that are faster.
Thunderbolt does come out from Raging Bolt. Will do a good amount of damage to Koraidon. Is enough for the KO thanks to that Photosynthesis boost. So we're now down to two Pokemon remaining for both trainers. It's going to be Raging Bolt and Chi-Yu versus Raging Bolt and Hearthflame Ogerpon. This Ogerpon now, I believe it's pretty low on HP. Could possibly just be in Thunderclap range. Is certainly in range for a Dark Pulse from this Chi-Yu. And of course the Assault Vest on James's Raging Bolt will be a huge boost here. It will take a little bit less damage from Marco's Raging Bolt. You know, it still has the same Photosynthesis special attack boost thanks to the sun being up for I think maybe 1 or 2 more turns, and then it will go away and Marco's booster energy will actually reactivate. So preserve that special attack boost. The attack boost coming out from the Embody Aspect Ogerpon will come in handy here, but Ogerpon will only be hitting for resisted damage, only has Fire and Grass moves, which are both resisted by both the Chi-Yu and Raging Bolt. So I think if you can get rid of Marco Silva's Raging Bolt, you're in a really good spot if you're James.
You also get some really good information on this turn about which Raging Bolt can be faster. If you don't go for the Thunderclap, then we get a little bit more insight on whether or not maybe one of these Pokemon can be confirmed to be the faster Raging Bolt in this situation, and then you can kind of go from there. Marco does play it safe, though. This Ogerpon is certainly under some threat of a knockout by either of these Pokemon, and so the Chi-Yu is going to target its attack into that Spiky Shield, but it's going to be Marco's Raging Bolt that goes first, and it is enough for a one-hit knockout. That's incredible. Beads of Ruin, Assault Vest doesn't matter. It's going to be that Photosynthesis boost on top of all of those additional modifiers, and it is a super effective attack. Marco might have done it. He now has followed me on this Ogerpon to direct away this single target attack that James hasn't been able to switch up because it's Toy Scarf.
That was a really smart Spiky Shield to preserve that Follow Me. Now you have a guaranteed 2 attacks from your own Raging Bolt. Even if the first Thunderbolt doesn't KO Chi-Yu, you have to follow up Thunderclap to seal it up.
If James's Raging Bolt had survived here, it might have looked like a different story. But Marco, at the end of the day, is going to be able to get the knockout on the Chi-Yu and win this game 2-0 to move on. Let's see it, Thunderbolt, do your thing. And this poor Chi-Yu is out of here. Congratulations, Marco. He's going to make it into the top cut with a record of 10-1.
You're allowed to bring 2 restricted Pokemon to your battles, but Marco said, I don't need any. I will beat you with just my support Pokemon. That Raging Bolt put in so much work for Marco. The special attack boosting on the Photosynthesis, especially considering it's using the booster energy item instead of the Assault Vest. You're probably training it to be a little bit more offensive, a little bit faster in nature, making great use of James's own Beads of Ruin as well. I think that might have been the difference maker, knowing that the Beads of Ruin was lowering the Raging Bolt's special